we interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You know, I don't think I really knew what hate looked like until I became a police officer. Even as a police officer, I didn't know what hate was. And then a guy tried to kill me. And little did I know when he tried to kill me, he stuck a gun in my chest and we fought over the gun. But he was a fresh cut skinhead. And it's like, what the heck is a fresh cut skin? So then I had to start diving into the world of hate and really what was going on around us, and just not around what I found is just not around where I'm at in my department, but it's around the country and around the world. It is involving kids that are in grade school, going up into colleges. It's involving politicians. It's involving law enforcement. It's involving all the things that I thought that I represented that were good in life. And then when I get to the point where I have to drag Tawni into it to help me out because I wasn't getting what needed to happen from other places, then Tawni and I crushed it. And it's just, that is how hate worked. And that's how I got my start in hate, is that, yeah, it was a simple thing. A guy tried to kill me.
Yeah. And when I say that, I apologize for just saying, yeah, like it's no big deal. You know what I mean? Like, but the average citizen has no clue, sadly, or not sadly, actually, fortunately, they don't live in that realm. But once it touches their community, it's almost like it's too late to kind of catch up, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things like when you're talking about that, and we're going to get into all of the investigations, the background, how y'all work together, the importance of gathering intelligence, and then having a strategy to actually address this issue. But it's one of those things that when you start talking like that, and the average citizen does not have to deal with a gun in their chest. They don't have to deal with Nazi skinheads or other white supremacist organizations. But before we get too far into it, I do want to say for everybody listening that the voice you hear is Matt Browning and his wife, and they've got the Hate Next Door book that's out on shelves. If you're watching on YouTube, you saw that thumbnail up there. They go in depth in the book with the investigations that we're going to talk about. And now, fortunately, they can come forward and kind of tell their story. And it's one of those things that I've always wanted the listeners and followers to understand behind the scenes what goes on, you know, sadly in all 50 states with multiple investigations into criminal organizations, terrorist organizations. And what we're looking at now, and we'll talk about here, is just that skinhead subculture, that Nazi skinhead. And you would use the term early on. But if you could just kind of explain to people like what that realm was, and feel free to get into details and that sort of thing. If you throw out an acronym, like you and I could be talking, and we could talk about the 14 and 88, but if you say something like that, feel free to just explain to the listeners, because they love learning about, you know, threat groups and that sort of thing.
Well, what was crazy is, man, I grew up in Phoenix, and Tawni and I, we both grew up in the West Valley. We went to rival high schools, and I don't think, I mean, Tawni grew up in a Hispanic neighborhood, kind of, you know, just around the corner was basically all the Hispanic gangs and things like that. She went to school with these guys. I went to school and I had no idea, man. I played football with my friends, and we went and we enjoyed each other's company. And then all of a sudden it's like, what in the world is this? You know, and it's a crazy life. The Nazi subculture, the skinhead subculture, the malicious subculture, whichever subculture we want to talk about, it's all the same, man. It's based out of, I hate you because of who you are. And it's breaking into that culture and learning. I had no clue what 14 stood for. And I saw a guy at one of my first meetings in a big old tattoo of a swastika on his chest. It was so big that he had a wife beater shirt on that you could see it through. It was so bold, and everybody was laughing at it and pointing at it. And he's bragging about it. He just got it. And I'm sitting going, what the heck, man? What is this world turning to? But that was my second undercover gig that I did. And I was looking at guys with cracker tattooed on the back of their heads, and in swastikas, and 14 and 88, and 88 represents Heil Hitler. the 88 or the 88 precepts of the white supremacists. So there's a lot of learning I had to do.
Mm-hmm.
So luckily I go and do my thing, but Tawni did a lot of research for me, and she'd tell me, hey, just so you know, this represents this or this represents this, because I'm sure, you know, a lot of people don't get it, and you'll get it.
Mm-hmm.
But my focus is white supremacy. But in the gang world, okay, we got a drive-by shooting over here. So now the white supremacists go on hold while you go work a Hispanic drive-by shooting. Or you know, everything is put on hold because nobody sees the white supremacy going on around them. So that was one of our biggest struggles.
Yeah, and I mean, I really didn't get involved till way later. I kind of was taking care of hearth and home, and he kind of protected us. It was way later in the game. I mean, he'd come home and say this guy has a Swazi on his chest, and I just, so foreign to me. I mean, like you said, I grew up in a Hispanic neighborhood. We grew up, you know, went to kindergarten together, and we just liked each other because we liked each other, or we didn't because we were kids. So I mean, it was just a very culture shock, I would say, what you were learning on the streets.
Yeah, it was, you know what, but when you get into it, the politics of a swastika tattoo, that has to be sanctioned. You have to have approval to get that swastika tattoo on you. And if you get locked up, you got to be able to say, yeah, that I got this because of this person. Heaven forbid you show up with bolts on you, which are the SS lightning bolts, and you show up in the system with those bolts, and those bolts aren't sanctioned or authorized. I mean, you're going to get your butt kicked multiple times because you have unsanctioned tattoos. And so it was that political world. You just don't have to understand the criminal side of it, but you had to also start learning about the political side of the inner workings of the groups and the brotherhood, and how the Aryan Brotherhood, which is a prison gang, how they have effects on the street gangs and on your skins and on your hammers and everybody else. And it's just a crazy, it really, man, it was crazy.
Yeah, it seems like it kind of mimics, for those listening, like a lot of people will read different books, and some of them work these gangs, but like La MA in prison also affects, you know, Sureños out on the street. So it's the same thing, like Aryan Brotherhood in prison affects things that are going on the street. So a lot of officers and agents have used terms interchangeably, and they'll say things like that, like, oh, well, this guy's, he's got a swastika or whatever, so he's just Aryan Brotherhood street gang. And it's kind of like, not to nerd out, but you've got to put things in the right categories for long-term investigations, you know, and for your intel gathering. And so it's things like that when you go under and you do these infiltrations, and you can actually explain these symbols and the culture of it. One, paints a picture for jurors if something's going to trial, or for a department or agency to develop a strategy. Hey, how are we going to address this? Because, you know, the news coverage can be absolutely insane if all of a sudden you have some type of a hate crime occur, or something that gets out to the media of, here we have an attack with, you know, 5 white males, bald head, you know, and they've, you know, beaten someone to death. And like, what is the department or the agency there? How are they addressing it? You know?
Yeah. You know, and it's interesting. I'll tell you a quick story is that we did, my guy, I'm out of the skinhead scene. I promoted to sergeant. I'm running a gang squad, and my guys pull over a car, and inside this car, there was a black guy, a Mexican guy, and a white boy. Well, the white boy swastika tattooed in memory of Robert Matthews on the back of his head. And Robert Matthews was the leader of the order. He founded the order back in the 80s. He was head to toe swastikaed out, sitting in the back of this car. And my guys called and said, why is a skinhead guy with a black guy and a Mexican guy? And so and then he wouldn't get out of the car. The other guys got out of the car. So they call me, hey, Sarge, can you get this guy out of the car for us? And it's like, oh, guys, come on, let's do your job. But here's the problem. There's not training. My guys had no clue what they got themselves into. So I go and I stick my head in the car, whisper some words to this guy. He gets out, laced and braced, ready to roll. You know, laced and braced me. He had red laces in his Doc Marten boots. He had his suspenders, or you better call them braces and not suspenders, slung down. Everything was red. And I start talking to him, and then he stops the conversation. He goes, hey, you're Browning. And I go, yeah. And he goes, you know, you got paper on you. And I went, okay, it's good to know. I appreciate your time. I appreciate everything. Now get back in the car, go do whatever dope deal you guys are going to do real quick, send it back to the brothers inside. And I'm going to go find a little hole to sit in because I have another hit on me. The important thing of this story is our officers, unfortunately, when it comes to training, what we're missing now is the ability to talk and ability to understand what's really going on with a tattoo. Or why is a white guy with a black and a Mexican? Well, because it's about the money. That situation is not about the politics of hate. That situation is about getting money and sending that money back inside to the guys who are asking for it. And it goes with what you just said. Prisons run the streets. The streets don't want run prison. What happens inside affects the outside, and what happens outside affects the inside. And so that's a big thing that nobody really gets. And that's why it's so important when we talk intelligence that we talk to our corrections, we talk to probation, we talk to parole. Everybody gets together, because whether we're fighting, you know, the MA or the Mau Maus or, you know, BGF or whoever else we're going to fight against, we got to fight it together.
It's kind of like what you say, when you stand together, we win. So
yeah. And I do want to echo that in the sense that now so many departments, I probably say over the last 20 years, have realized the importance of that information sharing, you know. And when you had mentioned like Robert Matthews, is that idea of, and for those listening, you can go into the history of it, but there's a collection, an anniversary where Hammerskins and others go and show respect to him, and him getting, you know, killed in the FBI shootout. But the thing that has happened several years ago was Hammerskins had jumped or assaulted a music DJ during that event. And then several agencies across the country had to connect the dots to understand, what does this mean? You know, this symbol, this sticker that was found, or this tattoo or whatever. And that made national news. And it was linked back to, for me, it was like a flashback to the 90s when I was in the Army, and you had soldiers out of Fort Bragg that had killed citizens. And so then the Army did a huge investigation to figure out, what is this Nazi skinhead movement within the infantry units and that sort of thing. So all of it is cyclical, but now we can all connect very rapidly, either through, you know, communications, or, you know, just through emails. I mean, it's amazing how we can get plugged in to move twice as fast.
Yeah.
So just like you and I were talking pre-show and sharing information about people's names and who works, you know, like who's a good contact for something, we all start sharing the information. Like I said, like sharing the same brain, where when you're throwing terms out like 14 and 88 and training officers, deputies, and agents, like, get in the fight. Don't be scared of this stuff. And then to know it and to understand it, then you can kind of dismantle it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think when it comes to white supremacy or working hate, I think the history of the hate is so important. And that's, you know, you can go back on a Hispanic street gang. Is the history of that gang important? You know, it's like, what's going on now, who's fighting who, what's tagged up on the wall, things like that. But when you're working hate, to know who the order is and to know who Bob Matthews is crucial. You can't. I mean, we go back to Wade Page. Wade Page is a great example. He was hooked up with the Old Glory Skins, which was in the Carolinas. He was hooked up with the Hammer Skins. He was in a hate band. I mean, Wade Page alone has circled so many different organizations.
And his girlfriend was a Volkswagen. Yeah. The only female Volkswagen member. So, I mean,
Wade crossed every line, and it was the ability of officers coming together and talking about it. We with our organization, the Supremacist Intelligence Network, we could track Wade all over the place. Not just Wade, but we did all kinds of leaders. You know, JT Reddy from Arizona. You have Dave Lynch from California. We track all these guys all over the place. Here's the interesting thing: JT Reddy, Dave Lynch, Wade Page, they're all dead. Hate. There is no future in hate, and that's a lot of that stuff. And so, yeah, the history is important. You got to look at the history.
So, yeah, and you mentioned Wade, which is interesting because he was one of those that even working the intel side, I connected with people in reference to what was going on then, and the hate core or the bands that he was playing in, and that whole music scene that I had to kind of explain, how this is linked, what he's doing, then how that actually recruits and creates what I would call an infection.
Yeah.
And you're right, all through the Carolinas, that stuff was beginning to spread, and definitely through music. There were several other bands. I won't even mention their names because you don't want to give them attention. But also, he is a perfect example of the lone wolf, once ostracized from a group that, he aligned with, built his identity from, and then goes on, the offense and begins shooting. And eventually I would love to have Lieutenant Brian Murphy on the show, who was the responding officer that day that, started putting rounds down range. And he's written several articles in the past about other people who have been in those situations. But I mean, just a great guy. But just the same thing back to you were saying, and I want you to talk more about that organization you've got of sharing the information in the sense of trying to, and anyone who works, threat mitigation or anything like that, where you start to identify someone in your area who is falling into that kind of lone wolf category, or that person who was radicalized, and then all of a sudden they've been ostracized. Maybe you have a source inside who's like, this guy, even he wasn't good for us. But yeah, if you could talk a little bit more about that organization you were mentioning.
Sure. Yeah, better than most the importance of having sources, informants within organizations. You cannot, and for me, I hate labeling. But Tawni, it came to the point where Tawni actually was my source, because she would gain more information than I could, solely because these guys were looking for somebody to cry on their shoulder and to do all this other stuff. So we would it goes back to the music. We would go to a show, and I'd be in the pit getting my butt kicked and being pushed around and trying to stay alive. Yeah. Well, Tawni was back at the bar and circled by these freaking skins, getting information on who's dating who. Very important to know who's dating who. She was getting information on who's on parole, and I haven't seen my parole officer in 2 weeks. Just different things like that you can turn around and say, all right, let's go get him.
Okay, well, it really did start because he was so passionate about his work that I needed to bring him back to me, and not this crazy world that he was enmeshed in. And so it was like, okay, let's go to a show. I mean, whatever. My grandma took up fishing, I took up hate. So I just would go to a show or whatever, and it just kind of and I would say, hey, if I can get this information, then can we go do something I want to do? And I grew to love the shows. He grew to do things that I like to do too, and it was just kind of how we grew together as kids.
Yeah, I have to say too. I grew up in the music scene and punk and hardcore, so I know what you're talking about. And for us down in the South, it was the 90s when it hit. Early in the 90s, it was late 80s actually, but Nazi skinheads started showing up at shows. But we already had, the traditional skins, and we had sharp skinheads against racial prejudice, So it was interesting as a young kid to see these two worlds colliding, right in front of me.
And that goes back to what you said though too, is you got to understand these things. So as sharp are anti-racist skins. Your trad skins are dudes that just like to look like skinheads. They like the boots and the shirts. They're not much of a racial bone in them, not much hatred in them, but they just like the look. So the trads are getting their butts kicked by the sharps. Then all of a sudden, guess who comes in? The Nazis come in, and now all hell breaks loose because the Nazis hate the trads because they're taking all the girls and they think they're cool. And then the sharps see the Nazis. And we can say what we want about the Sharpies. Those are some of the most violent people that I ever had to deal with. And that caused that whole music scene back then. It was so much fun. But it was an extremely violent culture. And the music scene, we tracked a guy from Florida who was in the military all over the world because the military sent him all over the world. But on his time off, he would go to music festivals and play with his hate band at different music festivals on the military's dime. So it's just music was it. Music was the main force back then.
And they were there. They were, I mean, it, like I said, I kind of just went into it reluctantly, but it ended up being a good time too. So I don't know. We did some good work, and it was not on purpose. You tried to keep me out of all that. He kind of tried to protect me even from that whole scene.
I did.
So, but it's so encompassing in our whole entire life that it just, I don't know how I couldn't have gotten involved at that point.
Yeah, and it also kind of goes through evolutions too. So when I talk about music and people are just, and especially like officers and agents, they're like, who really cares? But like you say, it's that breeding ground.
Yeah.
And if somebody has a group and they're moving around, that infection is spreading. Not to mention having the military ties, and not everybody who's affiliated with groups like that in the military are like these, elite fighters. I mean, a lot of people are working supply and communications, but they're learning how to build organizational structure. And to me, that's kind of one of the scariest things. You know what I mean? In that sense, someone like that you're tracking has the organizational skills.
And these guys are not your knuckle dragging idiots. These guys, I mean, some of them can barely put two sentences together. But there's other guys who are college educated. Their families come from. I put a guy in prison for murder whose mother was a brain surgeon and father is an attorney. You know,
legit.
There's no hate does not have bounds. They don't go to morons and idiots. Hate goes to anybody who will open their mind to this garbage, because hate actually changes the chemical makeup of your brain. And so for me, that's why it was important, because I'd be going to all these different meetings and all these events. And next thing you know, my brain was going down the hate road. And Tawni was saying, hey, Matt, hey, you stay here with me because you don't need to go that way. And so, the military, they don't just train them to kill. They train them to organize. They train them thought process of how are we going to take this road, this street. And all we need is a bunch of haters or a bunch of whacked out 3%ers or militia guys with military training to say we're going to take over the city or this community.
Yeah, I think it's that idea too of if they're tapping into the leadership, how they motivate them, and then do that. Is it similar to when I was a kid and you would see on the news in the South a guy named Glenn Miller?
Yeah.
And for those listening, some of the listeners weren't even born or anything like that. They'd have to Google it, and then they'd probably pull up a musician or something with Glenn Miller.
They probably should Google it.
Definitely. And I was fortunate enough to teach and have the ability to teach my whole department things. And so when I got to that block about the roots of it, the same way like you were talking about, like to understand the symbols and what it means. But as a kid, when that stuff will be on the news with Glenn Miller and the Klan all throughout the South, like they're marching in camo uniforms, like the woodland camo, terrified me, because I was scared that like now this group that I would see in history books wearing, the pointy hats and burning crosses now look like soldiers, who are going to like invade our homes and shoot and kill us, So it terrified me. But then later in life, and those that Google it, you'll see open sources talking about that same Klan leader later in life getting stopped in the South with, I believe it was a black male dressed as a female, but was in the act of prostitution. And he was hooked up on it. And then I think the way the sources read news and stuff like that he was working with those agencies. Then later, I think if my facts are right, in Kansas, maybe had stabbed someone. Yeah,
he shot up the Jewish daycare.
Okay,
he killed a grandfather was there with his grandson, and they were in the park. And Glenn Miller rolled in, and he was a lot of. Here's the thing about Glenn Miller was Green Beret. He wasn't just some idiot know nothing guy. The guy. He took his Green Beret leadership and skills, and he taught the Klan. I I love the military. I love law enforcement. I love anybody who fights for the unjust that there are in this world. But when you take the training that you're giving to fight for good and you convert that and train other people who want to do bad, that's where my problem comes in. So Glenn Miller is a great example of from military through the Klan through a Jewish daycare center shooting in, I believe it was Kansas. So great example. But again, unless you look at the history and you understand what's going on and you dive into it, you know, that's where we're missing. I think that's the most important part. And back to your question about our network, I mean, there's guys in every state. There's guys like you, guys like me in every state who know what's going on within the white power world or within the Nazi world. And then our organization just brought all those people together and we were able to talk, communicate, track. And
well, I mean, it started because Matt was so frustrated because he was told from his department that he needed to stay in the jurisdiction. Well, hate really knows no boundaries. And if you don't share that information, and I mean, once those guys got together from California, they're like, oh, that, you know, that's so-and-so and that's so-and-so. Everybody knew somebody in these they put up one pic. And everyone knew somebody. It was crazy, but they were able to solve
a lot
of crime and linked everybody together, and it just all made sense.
But if you want to get into the real reason why we started the organization, nobody's talking, and the real true story is, and you know this, everybody in the biker world gets every bit of funding. So if you're working at OMGs, outlaw motorcycle gangs, you've got federal funding, you have state funding, you have local funding, you can get the task force together, and every cop thinks it's cool to go work bikers. You know, they get to go to the shows and the rallies and all this other garbage. So we're upset because there is a biker organization called Amen, which is a great organization. I know those guys, they do great work. But I got upset. So I said, you know what?
Jealous.
I got extremely jealous, if I want to be honest. So I said, you know what? They have Amen. What's the opposite of Amen? Well, it'd be sin. So we created the name Sin, and then we had to match the S and the I and the N with whatever words we wanted to. So we created Sin first, then put in the words just as a, you know. And if you look at, we have T-shirts that have upper and top and bottom rocker with a logo in the middle. It's a big FU to bikers is what it is. But that's the reason you started.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I've sat in briefings before, and it's always like that. Like they get a lot of attention, but then you look and it's like, well, but what should our focus be on? Where's the threat, in other words, coming from? Is it this hate group? Is it this street gang? Is it this biker gang? And I don't know why that is. I don't know why.
It's cool T-shirts. That's it. Yeah. I mean, really, they get to go to rallies, you know. And
I do think too. It's funny how a TV show like Sons of Anarchy can really thrust it into every home. I say every home, but you know what I mean? Like it becomes then a common thing. So if someone says, I work gangs, that's immediately what they go to. It's like, is the motorcycle world, you know, or if someone were to say, hey, the number one threat, you know, in your jurisdiction, whatever, is Hammerskins or Volksfront or whoever it is in the hate world, people would be like, what? Like that there's not a TV show about that, or there's not, you know, it's not in our collective mainstream, you know.
A really good point.
But that's why the book is titled The Hate Next Door. It's because this crap is next door, you know. And it's so, somebody ask us, they find out that I work undercover and stuff, and they go, oh, what do you buy drugs? Do you do this? I go, no, you know, just white supremacist stuff. Oh, we don't have that here. And it's like, oh, okay. Last night we were meeting with some people about this gang problem we're having out here. And the guy goes, listen, Matt, I don't think there's a white supremacist. I don't know a white supremacist. And so I had to break it down for him. It's not just white supremacy. It's if you think you're better than another person and then you inject violence into that, that's supremacy. So you could hate the Jews. You could hate the I forget the LG. If you hate the gay people or you hate any of this other stuff, you're a supremacist. But it's not it's not, anybody can think that, but as soon as you inject hate into it, or as soon as you inject the violence into it, that's where we have the problem.
Well, and you did name some people that he knew, and he said, "Oh, he's a good dude." And Matt was like, "Yeah, he's a good really, he is a good dude, but his philosophy, I mean, on the surface, but underneath all that, and the violence that he's creating is not good. It's evil."
Yeah, and I want to get into that about the book. So the idea is the two of y'all start to just write the book, or like how does that start from the beginning until it actually gets done? I mean, like,
well,
how did
I
that
mean,
start?
there were some times. I mean, and you understand this little bit. Cops aren't robots, and there were some times where it got a little dark. Right? I'm just going to go ahead and say this. I mean, he said something about our Hispanic neighbor, and I was like, "What in the literal hell?" You know, something. That's when I was like, "Yeah, no," because he'd been just dealing with it day in, day out, and it was seeping in, and so I said, "You got to get that out." And he started, so it really started as a thing of therapy, you know, so that because I'm like, where is this coming from? Because this is not you. This is not the man I married, and certainly isn't the father of my children, nor do we want any of that here. So he started writing it, and he found, you know, he found those answers through writing. And that's really how it started.
I think I was angry. You know, I was getting angry and frustrated because I saw the hate that was around me and nobody was doing anything about it. And I was trying to teach my gang guys, and I was trying to teach all this, but we're always getting pulled to work a gang task force with Hispanics and blacks. We go to Phoenix, work Crip stuff, all those different things. I was just getting frustrated. And then one night I pulled through a parking lot, and it goes back to the whole biker thing. And the biker said something, and I got out of my car. There's 40 Hells Angels and associates within this little 4-foot high fenced in area. I go, you know, I said some words I probably shouldn't have said. I said, I'm right here. Let's do this. Me against you. Let's go. Every one of you right now. And I'm going off on these guys. One of my guys came in and pulled me aside, and I called Tawni. I said, yeah, I just went off on 40 HA guys. But and then it goes into the intelligence that the bikers have. Within 2 hours, a guy from California called me and said,
yeah, that was scary.
He said, Matt, I just heard what you did in Mesa. You need to knock that crap off. I had another guy call from the Midwest and said, dude, was that you that went off on these bikers? And this is all within 2 to 3 hours of the incident.
And so you got to tell some were very praising. They're like, oh, that's so badass. I can't believe you did that. You know, and other guys that really loved him and cared about him and understand the job said, what the hell?
So all the stuff was combining, and all the stuff was going on in my head, and I really was starting to go crazy. And I called Tawni up and I told her what happened, and she goes, come home, you're done. That's it, you're done.
Yeah.
And from that night, that was my last night that I ever worked as a police officer. And you know, I didn't have a retirement party. I didn't get a plaque. I didn't get a watch. I didn't get anything. But what I did get is knowing that I had to fix myself. And that's where Tawni came in. Tawni was through the whole ride, and Tawni came in and said, you got to get the crap out of your head. And so that's when we started writing the book.
Well, and all of that, I mean, that was a long process, because never ever would. He loved his job. He loved what he did, but that was not him. He was Mr. Officer Safety. I mean, and that was not at all safe. It was effective. I mean, I think it made that all those Hells Angels like say, who is this guy too? It was pretty effective, but it was
stupid.
So not him.
It was so stupid.
Well, the only reason I'm laughing is that I think most people have been there at some point in that world where it's like, all right, here's my breaking point. I'm done with this. And I get what you're saying is like stupid in the fact of like now you're potentially just putting a target on your back where some prospect is told, hey, go handle this, you know.
Yeah, and exactly. And at this time, I just found out I had another hit on me. I just found out all this stuff. We had this big thing with JT Ready going on. I just got done, you know, getting cleared of 17 IA complaints that the border people had put on me. Never had a complaint in my career. And all of a sudden I wake up one night, there's 17. So I had all this stuff coming in on me, yet I was being told not to work hate. I was being told that Mesa, you're making Mesa look like it's the hate capital of the world and all these different things. And it's like, oh, okay, we're back to, we don't have a gang problem. We're back to all this stuff. And I think that night was just, I don't
And
know.
this
I think it was me, my brain telling me, you're going to die right here or you're going to leave. And
Yeah.
I called Tawni up and she said, you're done.
never ever did I expect that was the end. But
Mhm.
you know, there wasn't a lot of support for mental health back then. You know, if you even just a few years ago within law enforcement, and that was
Let's be real. There's not support now like it should be.
Yeah, I'm fortunate that I get to talk to a lot of different agencies, and I was spoiled for 2 decades with a department, a big city, that
Mhm.
we always had a department psychologist.
That's awesome.
oh,
So,
that's
so
amazing.
something like that, where if you felt comfortable talking to the department psychologist, that's what you go do. And um, special victims detectives, people who are dealing with child
Mhm.
exploitation, human trafficking, at least in my department, we're utilizing the psychologist, and she was well respected by the department.
Yeah,
It
I
was
mean, if you've got someone there and you can kind of say, "Hey, doc, this just happened." I mean, if we had something like that, that's exactly where I would have sent him, not home.
Yeah.
But I was what he had, so that's what we did.
And also that environment for a lot of people to begin to judge you and say, well, he shouldn't have done this or said that or whatever. It's like and I didn't work UC stuff. I always developed informants because what I was working, I couldn't, just because of my pigment. But sources were going through the exact same thing. Like they had like a foot still in this world, in their gang world, but they wanted out, like in their heart. They're like, I want to leave this place. But they still had to operate that way. They still had to almost convince themselves. And like you're saying, you're like almost rewiring your brain to see the world the way the people around you during your investigation see it, so that you don't do a micro expression of disgust when someone talks about someone in a racial slur, or talks about stomping somebody to sleep. Like you have to have very similar micro expressions to everybody around you. And I do think there's a bigger topic to talk about for police departments to like really focus on developing a department psychologist solely for that department, or that is shared maybe with smaller, suburbs.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be, because if we had that it was just a moment in time. This was not the man. I mean, this man has a really big heart. He's a good dude, and this was just a moment in time. And yeah, it was just. But I knew that we had to stop it before it did take over. And I think that we can. I mean, like I said, you guys aren't robots. You are superheroes, but you're not robots. And every once in a while, you need to take it. You need to be able to say, "Hey, I'm human," and that's okay.
But I've never talked to anybody who, I mean, I mean, really, when you talk about these micro expressions, I don't think people understand that when you're working, a lot of people think, oh, working undercover, that's cool. You get to go pretend and play and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And you know what? Quite honestly, it is fun. It was a great ride. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad some came. We locked up 19 skinheads in Arizona alone for murder or attempted murder. It's very successful in what I did, and I take pride in that. But also the backside of that is I've also had guys come to my house. I've been confronted at grocery stores. I was at a Walmart when the Klan comes walking in. They want to hang out with Packy, but Packy's really mad with his family at the time. And the micro expressions that you produce are what people key on. And when you're working hate is motivated by fear. I believe fear is one of the biggest motivators of hate, because if a Klan, if a Hammer, a Volksfront, Vinlander, whoever else knows that you're afraid of them, you're their target. They will go after you. And knowing that, wow, when you say micro expressions, the slightest little, that you do, you're done. Not just done undercover, but they're going to say, this guy's a freaking cop, and they're going to test you, and they're going to assault you. They're going to kill you and dump you in the bush. JT Reddy said, they need to kill me and bury me out in the desert. So there's a lot of different things that need to happen. And wow, micro expressions are huge.
Yeah, it's in the whole body language that we can articulate, you, me, and other people in that field. But in the criminal world, it's their instinct that
Yeah.
they're reading. And like you said, those same instincts read it and they're like, oh, something's just off just a little bit with this guy, you know, or like, what's his deal every time we start bringing up whatever, this stabbing or this incident? Like he's not in on the conversation. He's not thinking it's funny or whatever. Those same instincts, you know, are crazy. Like that's what keeps their like unit integrity, so to speak. Like that's what keeps the outsiders out. But then once you infiltrate the way you did, it breaks the backbone of that organization and across the country. Like that's the big thing too, that I think people miss the boat. Your investigation successful in Arizona affects every other state that has that same problem, because just like you said, the word spread when, you know, when you confronted HA like that, very quickly the word spread. Those investigations spread twice as fast, and then organizations begin to go in self-preservation mode, like, hey, someone in Arizona infiltrated, you know, this group, what's going on in our own house, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, and so while other agencies can't articulate it, they better be supporting other people in investigations with intel and that sort of thing, because it will directly affect their own jurisdiction by slowing down those operations. I think history will also show, when people read your book and they start knowing about the investigations, they history, you know, 20, 30, 40 years from now will say there were people on the front lines doing this type of really dangerous work. And now what are the effects of it?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Well, yeah. And that's a great point, because like when Tawni started doing her thing, she was coming to me saying, hey, what do I say? How do I promote myself?
What's my backstory? What am I going to do? You know, that kind of silly stuff.
Because my first meeting, I walk in and I went, oh crap, I have no backstory. You know, I sat in dead with these 4 guys, and it's like, shoot, what is my backstory? And so I created one as I went. And that's why I told Tawni, just be yourself.
Yeah, it was
just
like
ask
it was
questions.
like more, what should I wear? And just silly things like that. He goes, just go be you.
Just be yourself.
And doing that, telling guys not to swear, that it was hurting my ears. Don't you get sick of all your swear words? You know, just silly things that you don't think would work, was very effective.
And that's why when we go places and somebody says, yeah, I'm going to be an undercover cop, I look at them and I talk to them and said, you won't make it. Because you're cocky, you're arrogant, you're promoting yourself. You don't do it. A good undercover cop is extremely humble, is quiet, wants to look more than talk, and he can remember the things that, okay, the guy off to my left has cracker tattooed. The guy on my right came in with a girl that's sitting with this other guy, so maybe I should ask this girl questions because she probably broke up with this guy and hooked up with this guy. You know, and there's all these different things. And that's what Tawni was good at, you know?
The criminal stuff he did, because I am not quiet, or, you know, none of those things that he just said am I. But I was able to do my part of it, and he took it criminally, because, I mean, and that's good, because we had to be real. The information I got was basically linking, and he took it criminally.
But we've talked a couple times that the name Volksfront has come up. And Volksfront was probably the largest skinhead crew that was worldwide. The Hammer Skins had different chapters in Italy and Spain and the UK, in Germany, Croatia. But Volksfront was in Spain, Germany, the Netherlands, the UK, Croatia, plus all over the United States. They added some guys in South America. Canada was crawling with them. So they were literally worldwide with one leader,
strong leader.
Yeah, he was an amazing leader. But the thing that broke them up was her. And nobody went to jail. It was exposing.
You know, he just got really frustrated with, he wanted to put everybody in jail. I'm like, don't we just want to stop the behavior? I mean, it just goes back to being mom stuff. I'm not trying to put you in timeout, dude. I just want you to stop doing what you're doing. So it was just kind of that philosophy. And when law enforcement and stuff really wasn't getting on board, or if it was going to take too long, that's what you employed. Let's stop the behavior. What
finally happened with Volksfront is they were having their fest, and it was at a guy's house in Missouri. And so I'm calling all the Missouri guys. I'm calling all the different people from all over the place, and nobody would take my phone call, and nobody would talk to me about it for whatever reason. And this is one of the things that I will talk trash about law enforcement all day long on a few things, and this is one of them. You got to freaking communicate. You have to trust the people who are giving you information, and you have to share the information. Intelligence on your desk is just useless information. You got to use your intel, and you got to get that intel. So I'm trying to say, hey guys, you're going to have about 50 to 100 dudes at this house that are all tatted out. They're Volksfront members or probates. It's going to be a problem. And finally, nobody would take my phone call. And so I called the dude at the house. I go, hey, this is Matt Browning. I'm with the Skinhead Intelligence Network. I know who you are. I know where you're at. And the guy hung up on me, Googled who I was, called me back, and he goes, you know, what the F you want, mother effer, and all this other stuff. I go, if you don't stop this, within 30 minutes, I will have every road blocked off. Everybody coming and going is going to go to jail, get tickets, and you guys, your party is going to be over. And within 30 minutes, the leader, Randy Krager, cut everybody's patches off their jackets, threw them in a fire. We're done. From that day on, Volksfront disappeared, not just in the U.S., but worldwide. And
they're underground, but
they're see, you can't take the hate out of the person. They're always going to hate, but the promoting of the ideology through their rhetoric is slowed down drastically. And so the thing about it is that they stopped. We were influential on how they stopped, and now that roller coaster ride that you talked about, the roller coaster ride of hate, is down at the bottom because these guys are looking for a leader. As soon as new leader stands up, that roller coaster goes back up to the top. Richard Spencer falls from grace. It'll go back down, looking for a leader. And that's how the white power world is. We shut them down, and then they look for a new leader.
And that's a great point too, for that there are a lot of listeners who are trying to learn how to do law enforcement. You know what I mean? Like to do cop work, and they're in departments, sometimes very large cities, they're going hands off on everything. No more proactive investigations, no more anything in that sense. And you bring up a good point. If your intel is solid and your reputation is solid, and you call someone directly and say, this is the deal, only an idiot in charge of an organization like that would continue on with that meeting and get everybody potentially locked into a RICO investigation or whatever. And so there are probably people listening going, oh, all they did was cut their patches and then go underground. Okay, true. But it's very hard to build an organization when you're underground like that, and you don't have these cool patches and you don't have these symbols to kind of unite everybody around. I mean, it's a study in sociology, but a lot of people join organizations solely because they're drawn to these symbols.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect example of like going on the offense and almost like not everything's going to be a criminal charge, but only an idiot would continue with this, knowing that I know and I have the capabilities of shutting everything down.
Right. And that's you're 100% right. And this is why it's so important to have the history of what's the history of Volksfront. They killed a homeless man in Tacoma, Washington. They went down into California. They got kicked out of San Diego. They have ex-military guys that were training them, ex-military guys as part of the organization. They have guys that were part of biker organizations. They have Volksfront had the ability to be the most violent skinhead crew. They had a huge problem with the Old Glory skins. I mean, huge problem. They had a war with the Hammer skins.
Well, they were growing fast internationally. I mean, they were getting stronger and stronger. And when all this went down, you know, the UK, to your point, the UK crew also went down. It was everybody. It went, and they were strong and they had good leaders. So,
but if you know who Vinlanders, the Vinlander Social Club, those guys were battling with the Volksfront guys. And once Volksfront went down, Vinland went, whoa. We better do something.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to what you're saying. One crew falls from grace. Every other crew is looking at that going, I don't want to be part of that.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things too, when you're talking about knowing the history, also what works, strategies that have worked in the past. So if an agency is trying to address this problem and they know, hey, here are the facts, this is how Volksfront was dealt with. I mean, relatively inexpensive if you're looking at cost analysis in a department. You know, you don't have to always stand up this task force and get approval. It's like people that are plugged into Intel and are communicating, hey, this technique works. It's applicable too with street gangs. When someone knows there's going to be beef between, 9 Trey Bloods and 8 Trey Crips or whoever, throw in, Sureños, Norteños, 18th Street. If there's going to be beef or violence, future violence at a party, shut the party down. Call the person that owns the house or wherever, start putting the word out. Hey, we know this is going to occur. There's going to be a police presence. Go be somewhere else in another city, but don't be here tonight, kind of thing.
And some of the things that Matt would say is, you like, let them infight. They'll implode on themselves. I mean, just things like that. He'd say, don't, I'd feel bad about so-and-so fighting with so-and-so. He's like, let him fight, because that's how they'll implode on themselves.
I tell Tawni, hey, tell him this, just because I knew it would start a fight. And it's like, all right, this group's done. We don't have to worry about them.
I hate talking about that, but he knew exactly what to say, to have me say, and it would be like 2 sentences long, and all of a sudden it was a big, raging war.
Yeah, and I think too that it, at the root of probably 60% of people that get involved in any kind of organization like that, they have a breaking point. Some people are just like hell bent on getting to prison as fast as they can, so they're going to go out there and put in work, earn their laces, that sort of thing. But it's this idea that there's a certain percentage that at some point that they have a breaking point. Either they have a child, that's small and is beginning to demonstrate some of the hate that they're pushing, or they learn their own organization may be exploiting them. And I do want to say that I hope there's some success stories at some point where people wanted out of these organizations and either by law enforcement, or just voluntarily stepped away, and just said, hey, I got to get off the radar. I don't know. Did you experience some of that?
We had it
quite often.
We had it, and we got to be real careful with who we say what, but there's been some real success stories along those ways, and guys that were working with Matt that I think their crews would be really, really shocked, how influential they were on some of these investigations and how much they helped and who they were.
But it goes back to this. I mean, our goal as police officers is to stop the crime. Mm-hmm. You know what? And if in the wake of stopping the crime, if someone goes to jail, bonus, but our goal is to make sure the crime stops. I took it to the next step, is that I want to stop the crime, but I also want to shut down an organization, and so everybody scatters. Mm-hmm. Well, in the process of shutting down organizations, you get those people who say, holy crap, man, I can't do this anymore. We had a guy, all he wanted to do was get out of the skinhead movement. I locked all his buddies up for murder, and he called me up and he says, hey, I just want a camera. And if I could get a camera, then I can start my business. And I said, you need a camera? And he goes, yeah. I said, all right, drive me around and show me the places where you guys beat people down that is unreported. And I'll get you a camera. And he said, all right. So we spent a day or two driving, and the stories were, he was crying in the back of our car about the things that he had done and everything else. We give him a camera. Homie's killing it now. He's got a graphic design company, all because we got him a camera. And so if we give people the opportunity to do good, because remember, the opposite of hate is love. So let's put a little bit of love in their life. And, it can be kindness. It can be good. It can be, we don't have to use the word love, but we do. It could be, just.
You do now.
Yeah, I do now because Tawni makes me. But if we inject love back into their life that was taken out by hate, the things that these people can do is amazing.
Yeah, we can rewire that brain back. Yeah. Because I don't think we're born to hate. I know we're not born to hate. We're born, that's not innately what humans, maybe you have to feed it though. And maybe we feed it with something that's better.
I'm actually good friends with a guy I put away for murder. We talk all the time. And every racist tattoo on his body, he's covered up, with now he's a sharp, of course, but still he's not in the hate scene anymore. He gets out from prison. And when he gets out, he wants to go on a little speaking thing at schools and let kids know, if you do this, if you follow this pattern that I followed, you will end up like me, and you don't want to end up here. And that's what we need, more honesty. And in law enforcement, we need the same. I can tell you, and I think you understand, if you do what I did in my career without talking about it, without sharing experiences, you will find yourself in a parking lot with 40 Hells Angels saying, let's do this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what we want to avoid.
Yeah. I can't stress enough, people that have messaged, sorry about that, that have taken my class and stuff, know that like that's what I've always pushed, is the love aspect, the compassion, you try to be grounded for that person, because most of the time, like I said, either it's self-hate, they hate themselves and they're making horrible decisions, or it's projected to but it's just one of those things, that I just want more people to understand that that it's okay to show someone love who is not showing other people love, or who is actually very violent, but understand, look, no matter what, you have an out at some point. Now, whether you take it or not, it's up to you. And if you want that one-way express ticket to, life in prison, that's on you. But, myself and my unit, we're here to actually help get you out of this mindset, to kind of reprogram you. And I've even asked people like, hey, have you ever even talked to someone about doing a job application? I don't care if you're 25 years old and they're caught in any kind of group or cycle like that. You'd be amazed that when you take interest and go, look, I understand the crime stuff and I understand the hate and everything. Like, what are you doing to put, food on the table? Like, you don't have a job. You've never even done a job application nor a job interview. Like, I'm getting ready to show you how to do a job interview.
Yeah.
And dudes are like, man, like no one's ever done this kind of thing. It's like, well, that's how you break the cycle. Like, if you're broke, you're going to depend on the gang. If you are living in a world of hate and your own leadership is not doing anything to help you or put, money in your pocket, they only want you there when it's time to go stomp somebody or whatever. Like, how is that helping yourself? I don't know. It's just this idea of like, it doesn't hurt, because anybody can flip the switch. I mean, you know that. I mean, you've been in deadly situations, and we can get into that if you feel comfortable. But it's like, cops or law enforcement agents are very capable of getting out of the car, talking to someone, hey, how are you doing? And all of a sudden a gunshot goes off or a threat presents itself. You can draw your pistol and go to work. Like, it's not like just because I show someone love or compassion, I can't now switch gears.
Well, and the thing I love what you're saying, because love is free. Caring about someone is free, and it's very, very powerful. It changes lives, and we're just so poor at giving it, and yet it's free, and it can change everything, and it can change even what's going on in the street. He's smiling over here, but and it can get kids, give that kid a lacrosse stick before they're looking to get radicalized online. Care about each other. I mean, it really is. It's not trite. It's not simplistic. It's the truth. Love is very, very powerful, and it does combat hate.
Yeah. Every time we start talking about this stuff, Green Day has a song. They say, do you know your enemy? And once you really know your enemy, then we can combat it. But you're not going to know your enemy until we sit down and talk. And I think in law enforcement, that communities, churches, businesses, everywhere, but I'll just say law enforcement, I think that's what we're missing. How many guys actually roll up into a gang neighborhood, get out of their patrol car, and just talk to people? I think that's a dying breed of people that needs to come back, because whether it's intel you're getting, whether it's community relations you're trying to build, whatever it is, if you want to solve crime, if you want to really be that superhero that swoops down in the cape and rescues everybody, you got to know that you got to know who you're fighting against.
And I got to say, I mean, Matt, we sat down just like a year ago with an Aryan Brotherhood. Yeah. Well, a guy that was too violent to even be. Matt said, you never patched. You never did. He said, no, they wouldn't let me. But I mean,
they wouldn't let me because I'm too violent, and they didn't want the attention brought to them. So then he starts hanging out with the angels. How come you don't patch up with the angels? Because I'm too violent and they don't want the attention brought to them. I go, then why are you talking to me right now? He goes, remember back in the 90s when you were chasing me and we got in a fight after I rolled my truck and the gun goes flying away and we were fighting underneath the car? And I said, yeah. He goes, because that was cool. And you took the time after you put the handcuffs on me, and we laughed. And you took the time to talk to me. I always remember that when I was in prison. And so I reached out to him for something else. But when he saw it was me, he goes, "Oh yeah, man, let's talk. Let's have dinner."
It was wild.
And
really wild.
You know,
well, because it was like buddies. It was just wild because here two different sides of the spectrum, but not really.
I mean, come on. It's funny. It's fun to talk about old times with cops, you know. Remember when we did this? But do it with the guy you locked up.
Yeah.
Remember when you fought Eric Sampson in the middle of Elliott Road? I said, yeah. He goes, freaking, we were all talking about that. And it's like,
yeah,
you know, it's cool. It's just,
I learned it. I was very fortunate as a rookie. I learned it. The patrol officer that was training me, like early on, there's a bolo, you know, be on the lookout for this guy for this shooting, and he's a gang member, he's a blood, and I'm just like fascinated by that word. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go write speeding tickets, and I wanted to drop me off in a neighborhood, find the most violent person, and let me deal with them.
Yeah.
And that was how this guy was. He was just this like salty Marine, you know, but everybody on the block respected him because of that. Because when it was time to throw hands, he would do it. But then also he was always cool with everybody. So he's like, hey, we're going to go process this guy on this existing warrant. All we're going to do is process him. He's like, it's not going to be a big deal. No problem. You know, so we scoop him up. He's in the back of the car. And my training officer's like, look, you want me to take the long way to the jail to get you processed? He knew what time it was. He's like, yeah, man. You know, so we're looping around the downtown area. And what my training officer is doing, and people maybe cringe at this and get mad, but he was letting this guy who's going to be doing a lot of years in prison for his shootings and stuff to actually ride around and look at an environment, you know, and he was a young guy. So it was like, he was looking at the girls, you know, making comments and all that, and knowing, hey, I'm gonna go lay down in the yard for a while, you know, but it was one of those things. And while we're riding around, he and my training officer started telling stories, and he's talking about, yo, you remember the last time you caught me and I had to run out the back door. And so my training officer is like telling the guy, hey, tell my rookie what the deal was. And the guy, and I mean, I'm kind of getting crude, but the guy was having sex with his girlfriend with his pants down, his pants kind of up. And that was one of the things he said is like, he's like, in my world, we don't have sex like everybody else. Like we always have our pants ready to go. And he's like, and that I had to run out the back door, you know, while this officer was chasing him. And like, they're laughing and joking because it's so funny because he's getting his pants up. But that was my first experience of, this is why I wanted to be a cop. Like I want to help other people, and helping sometimes means you track them down, you put cuffs on them, you charge them for a shooting because the community is better. You know what I mean? And then actually probably down the road, that person's better because they're not committing more violent crime and stuff. But you're right. It's that human, you know, connection where someone also respects that, you know, kind of like a street fight. You get in a fight and then someone either gets the best of you or you win that, and you shake and go, all right, we squashed it. You know what I mean? Like it's done. I respect you. You respect me. Let's move on our way. This is business. You know, you didn't get an extra cheap shot in, or you didn't make fun of me or say, yeah, I'm so glad you're going to prison. That's that rah-rah stuff nobody wants to hear.
And that's I think that's the part of law enforcement that unfortunately is dying off. Because like you, I mean, I think anybody who's truly worked in the intel world has had that same story that you just told about driving around. You know, mine was, there was a guy that was a guy escaped from prison. He was a West Side Mesa gangster. And my area that I worked, I was happy where I was working. I told Tawni, you know, I like working gangs. You know, I'm a young patrol guy. I like working gangs. And Tawni says, well, then if you want to work gangs, you better go to the other side of town where the real gangs are at. And I go, oh, no, I'm going to work these gangs. And Tawni goes, you're not working gangs. You have to inject yourself into where the gangs are. So, because again, Tawni told me this stuff, I did that. And I went there.
He gives me way more credit. We just had this little conversation.
I'm sitting, little. I'm sitting in the I'm sitting in the booking area, and here comes the big bad gang unit. You know, all four of them walking in, like, you know, everybody's looking up at these guys like they're the gods. And in the book, there's a guy named John Mesa. And Johnny, we went to high school together. Johnny's just a great guy throughout my whole career, always supportive, always helping me, always doing what he could do. And he was my boss later, my chief. Anyways, Johnny goes, "Hey, Matt, we're looking for this guy. If you see him, call me." And I said, "All right." Never thought anything about it. I go, but Johnny, I'll get him. Before the night's over, I will have this guy in custody. And the whole gang unit, ha, 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 yeah, some brand new rookie officer. Well, because I worked the gang area and because I knew where the gangsters hung out, because I stopped and talked to people, and because I had the conversations, I knew where to go to look for. And so I get a call of a guy sleeping on a dryer. It was cold in Mesa at that time, sleeping on a dryer in a laundry room. And I thought, right neighborhood, the guy doesn't have clothes, so where's he going to be? He's going to be trying to stay warm. I said, this is my guy. So I go, and sure enough, that was him. Get him hooked up. No fight, no anything. And from that time on, that's how not only do you earn the respect of the guys you work with, like the gang guys, and that's how you get anywhere, unfortunately, in law enforcement, is you have to be respected for what you do. But the gangsters then turned and said, who's this freaking Browning dude, man? And that's how this whole thing goes, this whole cycle. And I hope in the book that people think it's all but just a bunch of cool cop stories and undercover stories, which it is, but it's also the fighting yourself and how the family can really come together to help me out, because I needed my kids. I needed Tawni. I needed that time. And I just hope that people who read it can really have I'm not telling you to go hug a cop today, but I'm telling you, we're not bad people. We're not bad people. We want to make a difference. And unfortunately, there are bad guys on departments who are giving us a bad name. But if you look what you've done, look what I've done, look what Tawni's done, and I can name good cop after good cop after good cop.
So many.
Yeah, that, and I think that I hope that going into this kind of next era of law enforcement, because we always watch it change. The 90s was very heavy on proactive until, early 2000s. I think we're going to go back into that era of heavy proactive units and people trying to figure out how to do cop work again, where we all kind of know it. And it's like, hey, just if you would have just stuck with that, and there are areas you can study. Arizona's got one, Sheriff McLam down there, like his organization has stayed proactive, and you can look at their very violent crime keeps decreasing, while other locations have not gone proactive, or they've gone reactive, and they just disbanded a lot of their proactive units. But
you know why Lamb's good sheriff down there?
Why is that?
Because he's actually on the street.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Because he actually cares enough about his guys that he tells them what to do, but then he goes and does the same thing.
Yeah, and his just charisma. I met him several years ago, writing for Skill Set magazine, and his second in command, Matt Thomas, the chief deputy, he was on our show several episodes back. Same thing, we just talking. It's like they get it, they understand. You put the community first. You have these units out there on the street, and the top echelon has to know how to do that work. And if they don't know how to do it, put the right people in those positions,
right,
that do that. And Matt's background working cartels, and he's an amazing guy to talk to. And I love that through this whole era, they've just kind of kept the gas constant and doing what they do. And you can study their numbers, and you're like, yeah, if other cities would just do this, we might be all right, and really support the police. And that's what, like you're talking about, we're all human beings, and that's what internal affairs is there for. We all came through the ranks after the whole Serpico era and New York City, NYPD being exposed. And I don't know, I just that was not what I would say 99% of people going into law enforcement throughout the 80s and 90s. They were not joining because they wanted to be corrupt, and it was harder to corrupt someone coming off of the heels of that era of police corruption. And that's why I stayed on the police department. I stayed on, and other people express the same thing. It's like TV shows are absolutely horrible for our image, The Shield and stuff like that, where, people imagine there's all this police corruption, and we're fortunate that very few incidents ever reach, that level. If anything, it's the opposite, that you have someone get on a department, they're just not cutting it. And then they either get fired or they resign, or internal affairs says, hey, maybe this use of force was questionable or whatever. And then they go on and get into some other field, and they're probably happier for it. And the department's 10 times better, but I do want to echo that, what you said, like people to buy the book, read it, and understand there are things going on that the average citizen has no clue about, but learn about it, make an active effort to learn about it. When people are giving presentations, go to it,
Yeah, and there's stuff that we all can do, and I love that we fought for it, that there's solutions at the end of the book if your loved one is involved in this kind of group or hate group, and there are ways out. We've seen people get out.
Good. Hey, how can listeners reach you all if they want to reach you, or is that a capability y'all have where people can send questions or talk to you, or no?
Yeah, we have a website, mattandtawni.com. That's mattantawni.com. And we'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. I got to say this real quick too, is that just recently, Tawni's been involved in helping girls leave these polygamous organizations. Mm-hmm. And so we're actually there's a TV show right now on A&E called Secrets of Polygamy. And it goes back to what you're just talking about, corruption. On the show that aired yesterday, I was actually confronting an attorney general for corruption. And I told him I do not stand for corruption in law enforcement or politics or anywhere else. So take a look. And if people need help, we are always willing to help. We're willing to give you our thoughts and ideas.
And we have resources
and anything else.
Perfect. I want to bring y'all back on to talk about the show on the next time y'all come back on.
Good.
That's all right. Yeah.
Appreciate you. Appreciate your work. Appreciate what you're doing. Appreciate, you making a difference, because it takes all of us doing whatever we're uniquely capable or feel moved to do. And if we're doing that, we're changing things.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate y'all's time. Everybody go out, check out their book, The Hate Next Door. Check out their website. And there's plenty of information out there to read on hate groups now. Just kind of educate yourself. Appreciate y'all's time. It's Disruptors out.